Welcome to the Academy of Sleep, your peaceful haven for calming lectures designed to help you drift off to sleep. I'm Mellow Matt, your soft-spoken narrator with a love for quiet stories, gentle facts, and late-night wonder. I'll be here to guide you into rest, one sleepy lecture at a time. If you enjoy our bedtime journeys and would like to support the channel, you can treat me to a warm virtual brew via Buy Me a Coffee. The link's in the description. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and enjoy tonight's lecture. The Secrets of Happiness from Ancient Civilizations. Introduction. A soft descent into the past. Good evening. Welcome, dear traveler of the night. As you settle into the quiet cocoon of your bed, let your body grow still and your breath slow like a river winding gently through an ancient land. You've done enough today. There's nothing left to solve, nothing left to chase. This time is just for you, to rest, to dream, and to remember the joys the world once knew. Tonight, I will guide you through a twilight journey, across deserts of golden silence, through temples humming with soft chants, over mountains where the stars once whispered secrets to the wise. Together, we'll visit the forgotten corners of history and listen for the echoes of happiness from civilizations long gone and yet still glowing in the shadows of memory. The world before us was not always loud or rushed. It was slow, sacred, simple. Ancient people without our machines or modern comforts found joy in ways that modern minds often overlook. In the hush of dawn, the warmth of shared bread, the shimmer of moonlight on still water. They told stories under stars, danced in the rain, and found peace in the presence of one another. They watched the skies not for data, but for guidance, and somehow, through wars and wonders, they kept hold of a quiet kind of happiness, steady, deep, and calm. This is not a lecture in the traditional sense. There will be no dates to memorize, no facts to recall, only the soft unfolding of stories and ideas, each one a gentle lantern to light your way into sleep. So let your eyes grow heavier with each word. Let your breath drift in sync with the rhythm of distant drums and flutes, and let your heart open to the ancient wisdom of joy. Now, let us begin. Let us step softly into the dawn of happiness. Chapter 1. The Art of Harmony, Ancient China, and the Tao of Joy. Let us begin in the quiet valleys and mist-wrapped hills of ancient China. The time is long ago, so long in fact, that history and myth walk hand in hand. The air is crisp, laced with the scent of pine and early plum blossoms. Lanterns flicker along narrow stone paths, and the hush of bamboo leaves brushing against one another is the only sound. This is a land not built for haste, but for harmony. A place where every stream has its reason, every wind its wisdom. And at the heart of this world is the Tao. Tao, often translated as the way, is not a rule, but a rhythm. Not an answer, but a direction. It is the invisible thread that runs through everything. The flow of the universe, the breath between opposites, the dance of yin and yang. To the sages of early China, like Laozi and Zhuangzi, joy was not something to be conquered, earned, or demanded. It was something to allow. Like a lotus rising through mud, joy emerged when one stopped struggling and simply floated with the current of life. Imagine now a quiet scholar in flowing robes, sitting beneath a peach tree by a river. He is not rich. He owns little more than a scroll, a cup of tea, and the wind. But he smiles, not with pride, but with peace. He has learned the secret. Joy comes not from having, but from being. Ancient Chinese happiness was not noisy or grand. It was subtle. It lived in the silence between words, in the grace of a single brushstroke, in the perfect balance of sweet and sour in a bowl of soup, in the way a family gathered around the hearth and listened, not to argue, not to correct, but simply to be near. Confucius, another giant of this time, spoke often of happiness too, but his version grew from relationships. He taught that joy arises not from solitude, but from respect, from fulfilling one's role in the grand human family, from showing reverence to parents, kindness to friends, loyalty to one's community. For Confucius, joy bloomed when each person moved in harmony with others, like dancers in a great, slow moving circle. This harmony was not stiff or forced, it was alive, like a garden tended with care. You did not force flowers to bloom. You gave them what they needed: light, space, patience, and then waited, watched, trusted. There was even joy in imperfection. The Chinese concept of wu wei, effortless action, whispered that the most beautiful things were born when we stopped pushing, like a fish gliding downstream or ink flowing across rice paper. The happiest life was the one that flowed without resistance. There was a deep belief that nature itself held the keys to happiness. The changing of seasons, the shape of mountains, the call of the crane, all were sacred teachers. The sages did not ask how to be happy. They watched. They sat in stillness and listened to the Tao, knowing that joy would rise not from answers, but from alignment. So now, dear listener, breathe in the mountain air of long ago China. Feel the hush of twilight in a pine forest. Hear the soft rustle of silk robes and the distant hum of a guqin's strings. You are there, with the sages, with the tea drinkers, with the poets who found joy in moonlight and mist. Happiness, they whisper, is not ahead of you. It is beneath you, around you, within you. Let go, float, be. There is a village nestled among the rice terraces, where the sky blushes gold each evening, and children chase fireflies through the fields. In this place, joy is not spoken of as a destination, but as a companion, quiet, faithful, always nearby. The elders of this village do not give long speeches or chase ambition. They tend their gardens, bow to the sun, and sweep the paths with care. They know that happiness does not arrive with noise. It arrives with presence, with attention, with the soft joy of doing something well, even if no one sees. Among these people, meals are not rushed. A bowl of congee, a sip of hot water, a shared laugh across the table, these become sacred rituals. Harmony is found not in what is consumed, but in how it is shared. Every act becomes a meditation, every gesture a poem. And so, life flows, like the river beyond the village, carving the land with gentleness and patience. There is a lesson here, hidden in the rhythm of footsteps on stone and the rustle of silk in the breeze. It is the lesson of humility. Ancient Chinese wisdom did not place the individual above the whole. The self was a note in a larger song, a thread in the fabric of family and society. And so, the joy that bloomed was not sharp or self-centered. It was soft, mutual, enduring. It came from knowing one's place, from being needed, from contributing to something larger than desire. Even in the courts of emperors, where jade and gold glittered under candlelight, the greatest aspiration was not dominance, it was balance. The emperor was seen as the son of heaven, not because he ruled with might, but because he was meant to be a bridge between heaven and earth, a living symbol of cosmic order. When harmony in the heavens faltered, it was said, drought would come or storms would rise. To be happy, to be good, to be wise, it was all one thing, a single current running through the river of life. Philosophers like Zhuangzi taught through parables and dreams. He told of a man who dreamt he was a butterfly, and when he awoke, he did not know if he had dreamt of being a butterfly, or if the butterfly now dreamt it was a man. In that story, there is both mystery and joy, a kind of laughter at the absurdity of control, and a reminder to take things lightly. For the ancients, joy was found in surrender, in dissolving boundaries, in becoming one with the great unfolding of the universe. And still, today, in the ink scrolls preserved in museums, in the still gardens outside temples, in the lines of poetry that speak of moonlight on water, and the cry of cranes in the mist, we can feel it, that gentle pulse, that ancient invitation, to step out of the noise and return to the way. So if your mind still flickers with questions tonight, let them fall like autumn leaves. Let your thoughts slow like the clouds drifting over the yellow mountains. Happiness is not a chase, dear listener. It is a resting place, and you are already near. The Tao does not scream for your attention. It waits, like an old friend beneath a willow tree, like a cup of tea growing warm in your hands, like the hush that fills a quiet room just before sleep. You have already stepped into that silence now. The ancients smile. The butterfly drifts past your dreams, and the way carries you gently, softly, deeper into the night. Chapter 2, The Golden Mean, Greece's Philosophy of Eudaimonia. Now we drift westward. The night sky is different here, deeper somehow, littered with constellations that tell stories of gods and heroes. The sea is nearby, always breathing, always speaking. This is ancient Greece, the land of olives and marble, of lyres and reason, of radiant thought etched in stone and memory. Here, happiness was not seen as a fleeting pleasure or a burst of delight. The Greeks called it Eudaimonia, a word that doesn't translate easily, for it means something more than just joy. It means human flourishing, a life well lived, a soul in bloom. Let us begin in Athens, beneath the shade of a fig tree. A man sits cross-legged, robed in linen, eyes filled with quiet fire. His name is Socrates, and he does not speak of happiness as a prize to be won, but as a question to be lived. Know thyself, he says, not as a command, but as an invitation. To look inward, not outward. To cultivate the soul, not decorate the surface. To seek the kind of happiness that cannot be shaken by fortune or loss. He walked the streets barefoot, this man. He argued with merchants and poets, not to win, but to stir something within them. He believed happiness was born in dialogue, in the friction between ideas, in the slow burning away of illusion. For Socrates, joy was in the pursuit, not the possession of wisdom. Then came Plato, his student, a man of vision, of forms, of ideals. Plato believed there was a deeper world behind this one, a world of perfect truths. To him, happiness came from aligning oneself with that eternal order, with justice, with beauty, with the good. He saw the soul as a chariot pulled by desire and reason, always in tension, always in motion. And happiness? That was what happened when the soul found balance, when reason held the reins and the heart obeyed its quiet wisdom. But it was Aristotle, Plato's student, who brought it all down to earth. He taught not in caves or temples, but in gardens, among walking paths and breeze-stirred olive branches. and he spoke of the golden mean, the balance between extremes. Courage, he said, lies between recklessness and cowardice, generosity between waste and greed. Happiness, real happiness, blooms not in the excess, but in the center, in moderation, in rhythm. Aristotle did not ask you to renounce life. He asked you to refine it, to sculpt it with care, as a master carves marble, not rushed, not wild, but with precision, patience, and purpose. He believed a good life was made from choices, from habits, from actions aligned with virtue, and he saw joy not as a moment, but as a state, something cultivated over years, like a garden that must be tended each morning. He called it a kind of blessedness, something earned not by accident, but by living well, thinking clearly, loving wisely, acting justly. So let us walk now softly through the groves of the Lyceum. The sun is setting, turning the marble columns gold. Students lean against pillars, debating the nature of friendship and fate. Somewhere, a fountain whispers over stone, and a cicada sings its ancient song. This is where happiness lived for the Greeks, not in indulgence or ecstasy, but in the harmony between mind and body, soul and society. In philosophy, yes, but also in music, in sculpture, in theater, in the polis, the city, the shared dream of a better world. They knew that joy could not be bottled or bought. It had to be shaped every day, through choice, through self-knowledge, through living in accordance with one's daemon, the inner spirit that guides you toward your highest self. Let these thoughts rest gently in your mind now. Let the voices of the ancients drift like wind through marble halls. They are not shouting, they are waiting, inviting, reminding you that joy is not a flame that burns out, but a light that can be tended slowly, gently, patiently through a life lived in balance. There is something soothing in the way the Greeks viewed the world, not as a battlefield of suffering and desire, but as a stage for growth. They did not run from sorrow. They questioned it, named it, gave it a place in their stories, their tragedies, their myths. And in doing so, they made space for happiness to have depth, not just sweetness, but substance. In the small towns beyond Athens, farmers rose early and tilled the land, their hands in the soil, their eyes on the sky. They found happiness not in abundance, but in harmony with nature's rhythm. The olives they harvested were not hurried, nor were the grapes they crushed into wine. Each season carried its own gift, each labor its own dignity. For them, as for Aristotle, happiness was found in living in accordance with one's nature, fulfilling one's purpose, no matter how humble. In the evenings, the community would gather in amphitheaters carved into the hillside. There, by torchlight, stories unfolded, tales of gods and men, of betrayal and redemption, of sorrow and laughter. And in that shared experience, something ancient stirred, a catharsis, a cleansing of emotion, a joy not an escape, but an understanding. Even the gods of Olympus, brilliant, flawed, unpredictable, taught something about happiness. They mirrored the human heart in all its wildness. They reminded mortals that no one is above folly, that laughter and tears often share the same breath. And so the Greeks learned to find joy, not in perfection, but in truth, in being fully, richly, imperfectly human. The Stoics, too, entered the great conversation. Men like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, who spoke not in honeyed verses, but in quiet strength. They taught that true happiness comes not from what happens around you, but from what happens within. That we cannot control the world, only how we respond, and that freedom, Real freedom is the power to remain calm in the face of the storm. They believed that happiness was not about chasing pleasure or avoiding pain. It was about virtue, about being honest, just, brave, grateful. They wrote of inner fortresses, of unshakable peace, of the kind of joy that stands even when everything else falls away. And even now, if you listen closely, you can hear their voices, not shouting over the noise of the modern world, but waiting beneath it, like the roots of an olive tree, old and deep and quiet. So if you feel overwhelmed, if your heart has been pulled in too many directions, remember the Greeks, remember the balance, the rhythm, the gentle strength of those who shaped their lives like sculpture, not to impress, but to express something timeless. Breathe in that stillness now. Feel your breath, slow and even, like a marble chisel carving peace into the walls of your chest. You are not required to be everything, only to be yourself, fully and wisely and well. Happiness is not far, it is not loud, it is not urgent. It waits in the middle, in the mean, in the moment between action and reaction, between desire and discipline. Chapter 3: Joy in Simplicity, the Wisdom of the Ancient Egyptians. Around 3100 BCE, Upper and Lower Egypt unified under a single ruler, the first pharaoh Narmer, also known as Menes. This unification marked the beginning of the early dynastic period and laid the foundation for a civilization that would endure for over 3,000 years. From the towering pyramids of the Old Kingdom to the elegant tomb paintings of the New Kingdom, the ancient Egyptians cultivated a culture of remarkable stability, beauty, and spiritual depth. To understand how this civilization understood happiness, one must begin with the concept of Ma'at, a central principle in Egyptian life that represented balance, order, truth, and justice. Ma'at was more than an abstract idea, it was a lived philosophy. It governed the cycles of the Nile, the fairness of rulers, and even the structure of one's personal life. Maintaining Ma'at was believed to be essential, not only for social harmony, but for the afterlife as well. Pharaohs, from Djoser in the 27th century BCE to Ramses II in the 13th century BCE, were seen as divine stewards of Ma'at. Their primary duty was not merely expansion or conquest, but the preservation of this sacred balance. Temples were constructed not just to honor the gods, but to physically embody the order of the cosmos. Rituals, daily offerings, and temple architecture all reflected a desire to align human activity with the rhythms of the divine. Daily life in ancient Egypt was built upon this foundation of order and simplicity. For the common farmer, joy might have come from the annual inundation of the Nile, which enriched the soil and ensured a fruitful harvest. The Nile's predictable flooding, beginning in July and peaking in September, was both a scientific reality and a spiritual promise. Its reliability meant security, and with security came contentment. Egyptians, even of modest means, valued domestic life. In homes made of mud brick, families raised children, baked flatbread in clay ovens, and painted murals of birds, lotuses, and harvest scenes. The imagery was not accidental. It reflected what they treasured: the abundance of the natural world, the presence of community, and the gentle rhythm of everyday rituals. Joy for the Egyptians was found in simplicity, not excess. Tomb inscriptions and papyrus texts reveal a culture that took immense satisfaction in a well-tended garden, a shared meal, or a boat ride on the river. In the instructions of Ptahhotep, a wisdom text dated to the Old Kingdom around 2400 BCE, The sage writes, "Do not be proud of your knowledge. Consult with the ignorant as with the wise, for no one has monopoly on craft." Humility, it seems, was also part of their recipe for joy. Art and music played a significant role in cultivating this sense of pleasure in life. Musicians, often depicted playing harps, flutes, and lutes, performed not only in temples, but in banquets and festivals. Scenes on tomb walls from the New Kingdom, particularly under the reign of Amenhotep III, circa 1390 to 1352 BCE, show dancing girls, drinking scenes, and processions that suggest not a culture of dour labor, but one of celebration. Perhaps one of the most remarkable testaments to their appreciation of life comes from the Harper's Songs, a series of lyrical texts found inscribed in tombs as early as the Middle Kingdom, circa 2040 to 1782 BCE. These songs, often sung during funerary banquets, reflect a curious blend of reverence for the afterlife and a deep love for the present. One version from the tomb of Intef encourages, "Make holiday, do not weary of it. Look, there is no one allowed to take his goods with him, and none who departs ever comes back again." This subtle existentialism, long before the Western philosophies of Stoicism or Epicureanism, shows a culture comfortable with impermanence. Their joy was not in eternal reward, but in now, in a full cup of wine, the scent of papyrus, the laughter of children, and the cool breeze from the riverbank. The reign of Akhenaten, circa 1353 to 1336 BCE, offers a fascinating divergence in Egypt's spiritual life, one that, paradoxically, reveals even more about how the Egyptians connected joy to their understanding of the divine. In this brief but radical period, Akhenaten introduced the worship of a single god, Aten, the solar disk, and suppressed the traditional pantheon. While politically controversial and later erased by his successors, his hymn to Aten, preserved in tomb inscriptions, speaks not of fear, but of a radiant appreciation for the beauty of life. It is in these verses that we hear a pharaoh expressing almost childlike wonder. "You rise in perfection on the horizon of the sky, living Aten, who initiates life." His tone is intimate, almost devotional, as he describes flowers opening in the morning, birds singing with joy, and boats sailing when you shine. Even in theological revolution, the Egyptian spirit remained attuned to beauty, to nature, and to the quiet pleasures of existence. Under the great Ramses II, circa 1279 to 1213 BCE, who ruled during the New Kingdom's 19th dynasty, Egyptian culture experienced a flourishing of art, temple construction, and international diplomacy. But beyond the grandeur of Abu Simbel and the sprawling Ramesseum, life for ordinary citizens retained its stable rhythm. Tomb paintings from the workmen's village of Deir el Medina, which housed artisans working on royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, show a community that valued not only craft, but companionship. Deir el Medina is particularly unique because of the papyri and ostraca, inscribed pottery shards, found there, offering detailed records of daily life. From love poems to laundry lists, these artifacts show that joy was not limited to philosophy or ritual. It was woven into love letters and songs, such as "My heart is in joy, my love, when I see you walking by. I look at your beauty, and my heart rejoices." These simple lines speak to a happiness found in presence, in observing, admiring, cherishing another human being. In terms of diet and leisure, Ancient Egyptians enjoyed a varied and relatively abundant lifestyle compared to many contemporaneous civilizations. They brewed beer from emmer wheat, ate fresh vegetables and fish, and sweetened their meals with dates and honey. Bread was a staple, often baked in clay ovens in the courtyards of homes. Feasting was common during festivals dedicated to gods like Hathor, the goddess of joy, music, and motherhood, where wine flowed freely and dancers performed beneath colored banners. Children played with clay figurines, wooden animals, and simple board games like Senet, a favorite pastime that symbolized both entertainment and spiritual progression through the afterlife. Adults enjoyed storytelling, which passed down myths, historical memory, and moral teachings. The tale of the shipwrecked sailor, dating back to the Middle Kingdom, offered not only adventure, but wisdom and emotional resonance, a sense of cosmic generosity, and the idea that survival itself was a form of divine grace. Death, far from being feared as an end, was understood as a passage to another phase of being. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, compiled over centuries and reaching a standard form by the New Kingdom, was not a grim text, but a guide to ensuring continued harmony and joy in the afterlife. It contains spells, hymns, and declarations, such as the famous negative confession, in which the soul affirms, I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not caused pain. This was not only a list for judgment, but a reflection of a life lived in accordance with Ma'at, a life that, by its very balance and kindness, was its own reward. The tomb of Sennacherib, a 19th dynasty artisan, gives perhaps one of the most touching glimpses into this worldview. Painted scenes depict him and his wife tending to crops, harvesting, and resting beneath fruit trees in the field of reeds, the Egyptian vision of paradise. It is a place not of gold and glory, but of peace, of routine, of simple fulfillment. Thus, to the ancient Egyptians, happiness was not measured by triumph or wealth. It was found in daily acts, in cosmic alignment, in human tenderness. It was a joy both practical and spiritual, rooted in the earth and reflected in the stars. They built monuments to eternity, yes, but they also left behind letters, songs, recipes, and dreams that remind us: a well-baked loaf, a kind word, a painted wall, a river's steady flow. These too are eternal. Chapter 4: The Pulse of Celebration. Happiness among the Maya. In the dense green heart of Mesoamerica, beneath the canopy of ceiba trees and the cries of howler monkeys, rose one of the most intellectually brilliant and spiritually vibrant civilizations of the ancient world, the Maya. From approximately 2,000 years before the Common Era, and reaching their peak between circa 250 and 900 of the Common Era during the Classic period, the Maya created vast city-states such as Tikal, Palenque, and Copan. These were places where pyramids climbed toward the heavens, where art and astronomy walked hand in hand, and where time itself was carefully studied, measured, and celebrated. Happiness, in the Maya worldview, was deeply tied to the concept of balance between humans and gods, earth and sky, body and spirit, sun and rain. Their world pulsed with a rhythm they believed was cosmic in origin, and joy emerged not in defiance of this rhythm, but in full participation with it. Every festival, every ceremony, every painted glyph was an act of alignment with the divine cycles that governed existence. Time was sacred to the Maya. They did not merely count days, they revered them. Their long count calendar, which tracked cosmic cycles over thousands of years, and their sacred Sulcan calendar of 260 days, were more than tools of measurement. Each day carried spiritual meaning. Each combination of number and name day was believed to have its own energy, its own influence on the lives of individuals and communities. To be born on a particular day was to carry a certain essence. To marry, plant, or begin a journey at the right time was to invite blessing and joy. In this way, happiness among the Maya was not random. It was cultivated through attention to the sky, to the seasons, to the voices of ancestors, and to the subtle messages of dreams and omens. Priests and timekeepers, known as AJ Keej, guided the people in living harmoniously with these forces, ensuring that the energies of the calendar were honored and balanced. Ceremony was central to Maya life. From small offerings of maize and cacao to the great public rituals in the plazas of Tikal or Yaxchilan, the Maya expressed devotion through beauty. They dressed in vibrant embroidered garments, painted their bodies with red and black, adorned their heads with feathers, and performed dances that reenacted myths, honored the gods, and retold the creation of the world. Joy was not passive. It was danced, sung, and shared. Music, played on drums, flutes, rattles, and conch shells, echoed across stone courtyards and jungle paths. It was the heartbeat of a people in conversation with the cosmos. And then there was the ball game, poke to pock, played on long stone courts found in nearly every major Maya city. Though deeply ritualistic and often connected to spiritual themes of life, death, and rebirth, the ball game was also a source of excitement and collective celebration. Spectators gathered in large numbers, cheering as players used hips and shoulders to keep a heavy rubber ball in motion. Relief carvings and murals depict not only the grandeur of the event, but the joy and honor involved in the play itself. It was a performance of cosmic struggle, yes, but also of strength, community, and sacred sport. Joy extended beyond the public square into the Maya home. Families were tightly knit, with a deep sense of responsibility to kin, both living and ancestral. Ancestors were not buried far from daily life, but often beneath the floor of the home itself, making the connection between past and present tangible and continuous. This closeness was not morbid, but comforting. The presence of the dead was a reminder of continuity, a source of protection, and a reason to live with honor and gratitude. Agriculture, especially the cultivation of maize, was another root of joy. Maize was not only food, it was life itself. In the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation text, the gods shape humankind out of maize dough. To eat was not just to nourish the body, but to partake in the divine origin of humanity. The planting and harvesting seasons were marked by songs, dances, and offerings. Children learned from a young age that their daily lives, sowing, grinding, cooking, were acts of cosmic participation. Even in their art, the Maya expressed joy through color, detail, and storytelling. Murals in Bonampak, painted in the late 8th century of the Common Era, show scenes of courtly life filled with musicians, dancers, and nobles wearing brilliant costumes. There is movement, elegance, and emotional depth. The Maya were masters of capturing both spiritual significance and the sheer vitality of lived experience. Despite popular misconceptions that often reduce ancient civilizations to war and sacrifice, the Maya were a people of extraordinary intellectual refinement and emotional depth. Their understanding of happiness was not separate from their sense of duty, their artistic expression, or their cosmology. Rather, it was woven into the very fabric of their daily existence. The classic period Maya, spanning roughly from the year 250 to the year 900 of the Common Era, produced a written language of remarkable sophistication. Thousands of carved stone stelae, ceramic vessels, and painted codices record not just the deeds of kings and queens, but moments of celebration, peace accords, royal marriages, and divine blessings. The city-state of Copan in present-day Honduras, under the rule of King Waxaclajun Uba Kawil in the early 8th century, hosted elaborate rituals and festivals in honor of celestial events and historical anniversaries, not merely as political demonstrations, but as expressions of joy, legitimacy, and cosmic harmony. Happiness in this context meant something larger than individual pleasure. It was a collective experience. The entire community participated in celebrations of the gods, especially during solar eclipses, equinoxes, and planetary alignments, which the Maya tracked with astonishing accuracy. The observatory at Uxmal and the Temple of the Seven Dolls at Zibelchaltun are prime examples of architecture designed to align with the rising or setting sun during equinoxes, transforming the built environment into a theater of light, shadow, and awe. These events inspired reverence but also joy, reminding the people that they were part of a cosmos that was alive, ordered, and full of meaning. Women played important roles in maintaining both household happiness and spiritual life. Queens such as Lady Cable of El Peru, Waka, who lived in the 7th century of the Common Era, wielded political and religious authority. But beyond the royal courts, everyday women prepared ceremonial food, tended to hearth altars, and taught the younger generation the customs that ensured balance and harmony. Laughter and song echoed through domestic courtyards, especially during feasts and transitions, births, name-giving ceremonies, marriages, and harvest celebrations. In Maya society, the relationship with the natural world was intimate and reverent. Caves were considered entrances to the underworld, or Sibalba, and were frequently the sites of offerings made in gratitude for rain, fertility, or healing. Pilgrimages to sacred springs, mountaintops, and cenotes reinforced a worldview in which joy was connected to natural cycles. The sounds of frogs after the first rains were not just biological signs, they were omens of renewal, music from the gods, invitations to rejoice. This reverence was reflected in their calendars. The Hab, a 365-day solar calendar, and the Tzolk'in, a sacred 260-day cycle, interlocked to create a 52-year calendar round. Festivals such as Huachakib Bats, which is still celebrated today among modern Maya communities, honor creativity, arts, and new beginnings. Drummers, weavers, and dancers participate not as performers for an audience, but as conduits of joy, channels through which the sacred enters the world. Even their mythology celebrated joy through transformation. In the Popol Vuh, the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque descend into the underworld, facing trials and tricksters, but ultimately triumph not through brute force, but through cleverness, laughter, and dance. In one episode, they entertain the gods of death with games and performances, turning fear into festivity. This story, deeply beloved, teaches that happiness can exist even in shadow, that cleverness, humor, and love are tools of survival. After the classic period, when many great city-states declined for reasons still debated, likely a combination of drought, warfare, and political fragmentation, the Maya did not vanish. Their descendants carried forward many of the traditions, values, and spiritual understandings of their ancestors. Even today, in regions of Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, and Honduras, modern Maya communities hold ceremonies rooted in ancient cosmology. The laughter of children playing with maize dolls, the beating of drums during traditional dances, the whisper of prayers into sacred fires, these echoes endure. For the ancient Maya, happiness was not a pursuit, it was a participation, a way of being in rhythm with the universe, of honoring ancestors, of celebrating the gods through music, food, and community. It was found not in what was accumulated, but in what was shared, not in isolation, but in harmony, not in control, but in trust. Chapter 5: Inner Peace and Compassion, India's Ancient Teachings. In the vast subcontinent of South Asia, where the Ganges flows like a ribbon of life across plains of wheat and mustard, and where the Himalayas rise like sleeping gods along the northern horizon, ancient India cultivated not only cities, languages, and sciences, but also a profound exploration of happiness rooted in inner peace, compassion, and liberation. The earliest spiritual texts of the region, the Vedas, were composed circa 1500 to 1200 years before the Common Era during the Vedic period. These sacred hymns, written in Sanskrit, formed the foundation of a worldview in which all of life was seen as interconnected and sacred. The Vedas describe not only rituals and offerings, but the deeper yearning of the human soul to know, to be still, to merge with the eternal. Happiness, or sukha, in these early texts, is often associated with the proper ordering of life, the performance of duty, and alignment with the cosmic order known as Arte. By the time of the Upanishads, compiled between approximately 800 and 300 years before the Common Era, a deeper and more introspective vision of joy emerged. These philosophical texts, composed by sages and seekers, shifted focus from external rituals to internal realization. They asked not how the world was built, but what the self truly is. They introduced the concept of Atman, the inner self, and Brahman, the ultimate reality, suggesting that the highest joy is not in the world outside, but in the discovery that one's own self is divine, eternal, and inseparable from the whole. One passage from the Taittiriya Upanishad speaks with haunting clarity. He who knows the bliss of Brahman fears nothing. This is the supreme bliss. Here, happiness is not a fleeting emotion, but a stable, unshakable state born of knowledge, clarity, and detachment. From this spiritual soil grew a garden of profound philosophies. In the 6th and 5th centuries, before the Common Era, two figures appeared who would profoundly shape Indian and global thought on happiness: Siddhartha Gautama, later known as the Buddha, and Mahavira, the 24th teacher of Jainism. The Buddha, born circa 563 years before the Common Era in Lumbini, now in modern Nepal, renounced a life of princely comfort in search of a deeper truth. After years of meditation and ascetic practice, he attained enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. His first teaching, the Four Noble Truths, begins with a stark admission: life contains suffering. But his message was not pessimistic, it was compassionate. He taught that suffering arises from attachment, and that freedom from suffering and thus true happiness can be achieved by walking the Eightfold Path. This path was not extreme. It was called the Middle Way, and it emphasized right view, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Happiness, in this vision, was not something to be seized, but something to be uncovered, like the lotus flower that rises from muddy waters to bloom in the sunlight. The Buddha's teachings were grounded in meditation, ethical living, and awareness of impermanence. By seeing clearly, feeling deeply, and acting gently, one could find a peace that no external condition could shake. In Jainism, Mahavira preached a path of nonviolence, simplicity, and self restraint. For the Jains, happiness was a state of purity, a liberation from the chaos of karma, the passions that cloud the soul. Joy came from compassion toward all living beings, including animals, insects, and plants. It was common among Jain monks to walk barefoot, sweep the path before them, and eat only what was freely offered. Yet their serenity, recorded by observers even in antiquity, suggested an inner freedom few could match. Meanwhile, in the vast forest, hermitages, and learned cities like Taxashila and Nalanda, Hindu sages continued to refine the teachings of the Vedas and Upanishads. The Bhagavad Gita, composed between approximately 400 and 200 years before the Common Era, offers a vision of happiness as selfless action performed without attachment to the outcome. In this conversation between the Prince Arjuna and the god Krishna, the reader is told, "A person who is not disturbed by sorrow, who does not crave for pleasure, who is free from passion, fear, and anger, such a person is called a sage of steady wisdom." By the time of the Gupta Empire, which flourished from approximately the 4th to 6th century of the Common Era, India was entering what many historians consider a golden age. It was a time of flourishing science, literature, mathematics, and philosophy. But alongside these intellectual achievements, the Indian mind remained preoccupied with the nature of happiness, not as a fleeting pleasure, but as a reflection of inner order and ethical clarity. During this period, the classical systems of Indian philosophy matured, each offering its own path toward well-being and liberation. The Sankhya system viewed reality as a duality between Purusha, the pure consciousness, and Prakriti, the material world. Joy, according to Sankhya sages, could be found only when one stopped identifying with the fluctuations of the material world and rested in the calm clarity of pure awareness. The Yoga school, most famously codified by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, offered a systematic path to that stillness. Patanjali taught that the mind, when left untrained, becomes a source of suffering, filled with turbulence, craving, and aversion. But when trained through asana, posture, pranayama, breath control, and dhyana, meditation, the mind becomes transparent like a calm lake. In that transparency, the light of true joy is revealed. The Yoga Sutras begin with a bold and serene claim. Yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. When these fluctuations end, the seer abides in their own true nature, and that nature is bliss. The Nyaya and Vaishesika schools, more logic and atom-based, focused on knowledge as the path to liberation. They believed that right knowledge dispels ignorance, which is the root of human suffering. But even in these more rational systems, there was space for emotional peace and happiness as a byproduct of clarity and insight. Meanwhile, Buddhism continued to evolve and spread across Central Asia, China, Southeast Asia, and beyond. Mahayana Buddhism, which emerged around the first century of the Common Era, introduced the idea of the Bodhisattva, a being who seeks enlightenment, not just for themselves, but for the benefit of all. This vision of compassion as the heart of happiness reshaped much of Asia's ethical philosophy. In texts like the Lotus Sutra and the Heart Sutra, happiness is described not as escape from the world, but as deep engagement with it, rooted in loving kindness, patience, and wisdom. Art and literature mirrored these inner teachings. Classical Sanskrit plays by Kalidasa, such as Shakuntala, celebrated not just the grandeur of kings and gods, but the sweetness of love, the sadness of separation, and the quiet joy of reunion. Poetry and sculpture reflected a worldview that did not divide the sacred from the sensual. A lotus blooming, a deer leaping through the forest, a smile on a painted stone face. These were all expressions of Ananda, the bliss that pulses through all life when seen with awakened eyes. In daily life, festivals like Diwali, the Festival of Lights, brought communities together in celebration of the triumph of good over evil, light over darkness, knowledge over ignorance. Homes were cleaned, lamps were lit, sweets were shared. But these acts were not merely symbolic. They expressed a lived joy, one that merged the spiritual with the sensory, the family with the cosmos. Even now, in the quiet of ancient temples, still standing in places like Ellora, Khajuraho, and Mahabalipuram, the carvings tell stories not just of gods and wars, but of dance, courtship, laughter, music, and learning. These are monuments to a civilization that saw no contradiction between discipline and delight, between inwardness and celebration. For ancient India, happiness was not something to be conquered. It was a state already present within, obscured only by illusion. It could be revealed through silence, service, knowledge, and surrender. It was not the flicker of a flame, but the radiance of a soul at rest, free from fear, full of compassion, and awake to the eternal. On Chapter 6, The Joy of the Hearth, Nordic and Celtic Contentment. In the windswept lands of the far north, where winters stretched long and the sun sometimes vanished for weeks, joy was not a fleeting spark. It was a slow-burning fire, tended with care, shared around the hearth, and passed from generation to generation, in story and song. Among the Nordic and Celtic peoples, happiness was rooted not in conquest or splendor, but in belonging, memory, and resilience. For the ancient Norse, whose culture flourished between roughly 500 years before the Common Era and the early medieval period, happiness was found in honor, hospitality, and balance. The longhouse was the heart of life, a place where families gathered by firelight, shared meals, recited sagas, and made decisions. Generosity to guests was sacred, and the concept of frith, peace, and social harmony was treasured above gold. The Havamal, a collection of Norse wisdom, reminds us that good company, fair speech, and humility are the true ingredients of a joyful life. The Celts, whose culture spread across the British Isles and continental Europe, lived by rhythms of season and story. Their festivals, Samhain, Beltane, Imbolc, Lugnasad, marked turning points in the year with fire, feasting, music, and magic. To light a fire at Samhain was to honor the dead and protect the living. To leap flames at Beltane was to bless love and life. Happiness came not from mastery over nature, but from moving with its cycles. Poets and musicians held high status in both cultures. Celtic bards and Norse skalds kept memory alive, weaving history, myth, and morality into verse. A well told tale could soothe sorrow or spark laughter around the fire. Songs echoed in the dark winters, not only as entertainment, but as acts of emotional preservation. In this oral world, language itself was joy, sung, recited, remembered, since love and kinships were central. The Celtic concept of anamkara, a soul friend, spoke to a connection deeper than words. In the Norse sagas, the bonds between friends and kin defined a person's honor and meaning. Happiness was found not in independence, but in interdependence, in sharing one's burdens and blessings alike. Nature was not something to tame, but to respect. The Celts held sacred groves, wells, and animals as symbols of divine presence. The Norse believed in landvetter, spirits of the land, who guarded farms and fields. A simple act, like thanking the soil or offering a bowl of milk to a household spirit, was part of the quiet joy of reverence. Even in hardship, joy persisted. It was the warmth of wool in winter, the satisfaction of craft, the laughter shared after work, the peace of a well told story at dusk. It was not loud, it was not extravagant, but it was strong. The joy of the Nordic and Celtic worlds lived in the home, the community, the land, is in the song. It asked for presence, for patience, and for loyalty. And in return, it offered something deep and enduring, a sense that one belonged, was valued, and was part of something far greater than oneself. Chapter 7: Love and Laughter in Mesopotamia. In the cradle of civilization, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, rose a culture that not only gave the world writing, law, and monumental cities, but also some of its first love poems, lullabies, and jokes. In ancient Mesopotamia, home to the Sumerians, Akkadians, the Babylonians, and Assyrians, happiness was not a mystery to be chased. It was a rhythm, lived daily in the intimacy of family, the ritual of worship, and the celebration of language. The earliest surviving love poem in human history, composed around 2,000 years before the Common Era in Sumer, praises King Shusin in sensual, reverent tones. It reflects a culture where affection, pleasure, and spirituality were deeply intertwined. The goddess Inanna, radiant and complex, presided over both love and power, and the sacred marriage rites reenacted in her name celebrated union as a source of cosmic and personal joy. The Epic of Gilgamesh, carved onto clay tablets in cuneiform script, offers more than mythic heroism. It celebrates the deep emotional bond between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Their friendship brings laughter, companionship, and shared wonder. Through them, we glimpse a Mesopotamian understanding of joy rooted in love, loyalty, and the preciousness of time. Joy in Mesopotamia also flowed through everyday life. Workers in cities like received rations of beer as part of their wages, and communal drinking was both practical and celebratory. Music filled temples and homes, with instruments like lyres, drums, and flutes accompanying dances and ceremonies. Lullabies were sung to children, and light-hearted tales, like the fable of the arguing master and servant, show a society that valued humor and wit alongside reverence. Festivals such as the Akitu, held at the spring equinox in Babylon, were vibrant public events. People dressed in fine clothes, offered prayers to the gods, watched performances, and shared meals. The new year was not marked with solemnity, but with hopeful renewal, laughter, and collective gratitude for survival and abundance. Women played essential roles in preserving emotional life, raising children, managing homes, and composing poetry. Letters and legal texts reveal romantic exchanges, playful teasing, and domestic tenderness. In royal courts and modest homes alike, joy was passed hand to hand in a shared cup, a love song, a carved figurine, or a whispered blessing. Though the temples and ziggurats of Mesopotamia stood tall, the real foundation of joy was found in connection between people, gods, ancestors, and the natural world. Even in death, ceremonies honored the return of the soul to the land of the ancestors, ensuring continuity and peace. Mesopotamian joy was not idealized. It existed alongside war, flood, and fate, but it was also deliberate. It was carved into clay, poured into goblets, sung at dusk, and offered to the stars. It was love that endured, laughter that echoed, and the quiet, enduring belief that the beauty of life, however brief, was worth celebrating. Chapter 8: Dancing with the Spirits. African Wisdom of Joy. In ancient Africa, joy was never a private pursuit. It was a shared rhythm, moving through the voices of storytellers, the feet of dancers, the call of drums echoing across plains and forests. From the terracotta sculptures of the Nok culture, active from around 1,000 years before the Common Era in present-day Nigeria, to the stone cities of Great Zimbabwe, joy was expressed not in monuments of solitude, but in celebrations of community, ancestry, and the living world. Among the Yoruba people, joy was woven into the concept of Ase, a divine life force connecting all things. To live joyfully was to live in harmony with this energy, honoring ancestors through offerings, names, and rituals. Ancestors were not distant spirits. They were present guides, protectors, and sources of daily inspiration. Their presence was felt in every naming ceremony, in every firelit gathering, in the songs that turned labor into praise. Music was central. Among the Dogon of Mali, masked dancers performed rituals reenacting the creation of the world. In West Africa, griots, oral historians, and musicians preserved family lineages and celebrated achievements through kora melodies and praise poetry. In southern Africa, call and response singing, clapping games, and dances marked transitions from birth to initiation to marriage. These performances were not spectacles, they were communal affirmations of identity, continuity, and belonging. Across many cultures, the idea of joy was inseparable from ancestral and spiritual alignment. Sacred groves, springs, and shrines were visited not in search of ecstasy, but of balance. Offerings of milk, kola nuts, or palm wine symbolized gratitude and connection. Among the Shona people of Zimbabwe, the mbira, or thumb piano, was played during ceremonies that called upon spirits for healing or guidance, its cascading notes creating a trance-like space where grief could soften and harmony could return. The African understanding of happiness was deeply relational. The concept of Ubuntu, meaning I am because we are, captures this ethic. One's joy was incomplete without the joy of others. To greet, to give, to help, to sing in chorus, these were expressions of a philosophy older than writing, rooted in empathy and interdependence. Even in hardship, the community was a wellspring of resilience, where storytelling, proverbs, and laughter preserved emotional strength. Even funerals were filled with music and dance. Death was not the end, but a homecoming to the ancestors. To mourn was also to celebrate, to remember with joy, to affirm the cycle of life. Joy in African traditions was not about escaping suffering. It was about enduring with grace, about facing life together and finding beauty even in hardship. Across generations and landscapes, African joy was never passive. It was danced, drummed, spoken, sung, and shared. It lived not in objects, but in moments, in the warmth of a fire, the wisdom of an elder, the rhythm of a drum, and the spirit of a people who always found a way to sing. Chapter 9: The Secret of Ubuntu, Southern African Harmony. In the southern reaches of the African continent, across the plateaus and grasslands of what is now South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, flourished a social philosophy not written in stone nor codified in law, but carried in voice, gesture, and daily interaction. This philosophy is known as Ubuntu, and it speaks to one of humanity's most enduring truths, that joy is not something we keep, but something we share. The word Ubuntu from the Nguni Bantu languages has many translations, but its essence is relational. I am because we are. A person is a person through other persons. It is a recognition that our identities are not formed in solitude, but in community, in interdependence, in mutual regard. Long before it became a touchstone of post-colonial ethics or political reconciliation, Ubuntu was lived. At the fireside, in the marketplace, on the worn paths between villages. In societies shaped by Ubuntu, happiness was not an individual pursuit. It was a communal condition, an atmosphere cultivated through generosity, humility, and empathy. To feed a guest was to affirm one's humanity. To listen to an elder was to strengthen the community. To reconcile with an enemy was to restore the fabric of life. Conflict, when it arose, was resolved not through punishment alone, but through indaba, a process of dialogue where all affected voices were heard and healing was prioritized over blame. In Khoisan and Bantu-speaking communities alike, the evening fire remained the heart of connection. Around it, songs were sung, myths retold, jokes shared, and wisdom passed down. The joy found here was not grand or ceremonial. It was gentle, consistent, sustaining. The pleasure of shared presence, of laughter rising through dusk, of knowing that one is seen and needed and valued, even in silence. Spiritual practices also reflected this collective orientation. Ancestral veneration remained central, with rituals performed to honor those who came before and to ensure their continued guidance. The ancestors were not distant figures. They were present in daily life, watching, caring, correcting. Offerings of sorghum beer, milk, or tobacco were made not out of fear, but out of love. To honor the ancestors was to acknowledge that joy does not begin or end with the self. It extends backward and forward across generations. Joy was also expressed through ceremonial dance and drumming, particularly during rites of passage. The transition from childhood to adulthood, marked by circumcision, initiation, or naming rituals, was celebrated with days of song, dance, and feasting. These were moments of pride, not only for the individual, but for the entire community, which affirmed its continuity and strength through each successful transition. The umgidi, a celebratory dance performed after initiation, was not just entertainment, it was gratitude made physical, rhythm made communal. Language itself carried joy. Greetings were warm, extended, and meaningful. To say Sawubona, I see you, was more than politeness. It was an acknowledgement of personhood. The response, Nikona, I am here, was not merely locational. It meant, I exist because you see me. In these phrases lies the essence of Ubuntu. Happiness is found in being recognized, in recognizing others, in the invisible exchange of dignity. Even in times of hardship, during drought, colonial conquest or displacement, the resilience of Ubuntu endured. It became a form of emotional strength, a survival of the spirit. Neighbors shared what little they had. Children were raised not just by parents, but by entire villages. Singing continued, even in exile. Joy, while sometimes subdued, was never extinguished. It was understood to be a responsibility, a sacred inheritance, a gesture of defiance against isolation and despair. In the 20th century, leaders like Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu would bring Ubuntu to global awareness, using it as a moral framework for reconciliation in post apartheid South Africa. But their invocation of it was not innovation, it was return, a callback to the ancient ways, when joy was not measured by wealth or conquest, but by the warmth of one's home, the strength of one's bonds, and the integrity of one's heart. To live with Ubuntu is to carry joy as a shared flame. It is to find happiness not only in personal success, but in the well-being of the whole. It is to greet, to give, to forgive, to gather. And so, in the quiet of a thatched hut, where a grandmother hums while pounding grain, in the dusty courtyard where children play clapping games, in the solemn procession to honor the newly departed, the spirit of Ubuntu moves. It smiles with the many, not the one. It laughs in harmony. It lives in joy that grows only when given. Chapter 10: The Desert's Gentle Song, the Nomadic Wisdom of the Bedouin. In the vast silence of the desert, where the horizon stretches unbroken and the sun rises without haste, joy takes a different shape. Among the Bedouin, the nomadic and semi-nomadic Arab peoples of the Middle East and North Africa, happiness is not loud or fleeting. It is measured, enduring, and bound to the essential rhythm of survival, simplicity, and kinship. For centuries, Bedouin tribes traversed the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, the Levant, Sinai, and the Sahara. Their lives were shaped by movement, seasonal migration with herds of camels, goats, or sheep, and by a profound respect for the land's severity and its beauty. In a landscape where excess could mean danger and attachment to things could be a burden, happiness was found not in possession, but in presence. The tent, woven from black goat hair, stood at the heart of Bedouin life. Divided into separate sections for men and women, it served not only as shelter, but as the stage for hospitality, poetry, and social exchange. The hearth fire at its center was both literal and symbolic, offering warmth, food, and the light by which stories could be told. A guest was not only welcomed, but honored. To extend hospitality was a source of pride and joy, a moral duty known as karam that defined one's reputation more than wealth or strength. It was said that among the Bedouin, a stranger could arrive unannounced and receive food, rest, and shelter for 3 days without question. Only after this sacred period would the host inquire about their guests' affairs. In this, joy was found in giving, in the sacred exchange of comfort and trust. A well-brewed cup of cardamom coffee, served in small glasses and poured with ritual grace, became a vessel of happiness, not for its taste, but for what it meant: welcome, peace, respect. Bedouin culture was deeply oral, and much of its expression of joy came through poetry. The qasida, a long and elaborate form of verse, was used to praise a host, woo a lover, grieve a loss, or boast of courage. Composed in memory and recited with rhythm, these poems were the heartbeat of a tribe's emotional and intellectual life. A well-phrased line could earn admiration for generations. And in the poems themselves, Joy was often found in small details: the movement of a camel, the smell of rain on sand, the laughter of companions around a fire after a hard day's ride. Love poetry, too, flourished in this tradition. Though modesty and reserve governed social conduct, the Bedouin soul was not shy in verse. Poets like Antara ibn Shaddad, who lived in the 6th century of the Common Era, wrote of forbidden love, of honor, of the pain and sweetness of longing. His verses, like those of many desert poets, reflect a joy that is melancholic, rooted not in fulfillment, but in remembrance and beauty preserved in memory. Spiritual joy was equally central. Bedouin life was suffused with a sense of the sacred, not institutional, but elemental. The desert itself was God's domain, vast, quiet, humbling. The rise and fall of the wind, the guidance of stars, the appearance of an oasis, each was a sign, a gesture from the unseen. Prayer in such a space was intimate, direct, and often silent. The joy here was in alignment, of knowing one's place in the grand, spare order of things. Despite the challenges of drought, tribal conflict, or displacement, Bedouin communities developed an emotional resilience anchored in trust, tradition, and the spoken word. Reconciliation after disputes was achieved through tribal councils, with emphasis on mediation and dignity. To restore peace brought joy not only to the feuding parties, but to the whole tribe. Harmony was more than a goal, it was the condition for survival. In modern times, the Bedouin way of life has changed dramatically, with many communities settling in towns or cities. Yet even today, traces of the old rhythm remain. A tent raised for a wedding, an elder reciting verses to a gathered family, a fire kindled beneath the stars during a journey. These moments keep the spirit alive. And within that spirit, happiness is not a thing to chase. It is a soft presence, a breeze passing through woven cloth, a song rising unforced, a silence that comforts rather than isolates. The Bedouin know what the world often forgets, that in stillness there is joy, in simplicity, depth, in humility, peace, and in a single generous act, in offering bread to a stranger or listening to an old story retold, there is a happiness that asks nothing and yet gives everything. Conclusion: Echoes of Joy, Lessons for Now. Across deserts and forests, valleys and islands, through palaces and mud brick homes, we have wandered together through the emotional heartlands of ancient civilizations. We have listened to songs sung in lost tongues, traced calloused hands across stone and parchment, watched dancers spin beneath moonlight, and sat in silence with sages beneath trees older than memory. In each place, joy has worn different clothing, but its pulse, its warmth, its truth has remained strangely familiar. What have we learned from these distant ancestors? That joy is not one thing. It is many things. It is a principle, a rhythm, a responsibility, a surprise. In China, joy was the art of harmony, found in silence, it's in balance, in becoming part of the flow. In Greece, it was Eudaimonia, a life sculpted by virtue, shaped with care, lived with reason. In Egypt, it was the beauty of simplicity, of cosmic order, of quiet reverence for the ordinary. In Mesoamerica, it danced through calendars and sacred games, in the cycles of stars and maize. In India, it bloomed from within, through stillness, compassion, and a steady gaze upon the eternal. In the Nordic and Celtic North, it glowed from hearth fires and stories, from resilience in the dark. In Mesopotamia, it laughed in poetry, flowed through beer and music, and lingered in a carved line of clay. In Africa, it danced with the spirits, spoke through drums and proverbs, and lived in the hands of the community. In the philosophy of Ubuntu, it became the joy of belonging, of being because others are. And in the deserts of the Bedouin, joy became silence and shadow, the sacredness of presence and humility. None of these cultures equated happiness with constant pleasure. None made joy the product of mere wealth. They did not measure life's worth in gold, but in goodness, in relationships, in acts of care, in alignment with something greater, whether it be nature, the ancestors, the divine, or the inner self. They did not ask, "How can I be happy?" They asked instead, "How can I live rightly?" And in living rightly, joy came, unforced, flowing, real. These ancient voices, though soft with age, still speak to us. They call us back to the center, back to what matters: a shared meal, a kind word, a well made thing, the rhythm of breath, the grace of humility, the courage to forgive, the wisdom to wait. Perhaps we have not lost the secrets of happiness. Perhaps we have simply been moving too fast to hear them. The ancients whisper, "Still, slow down, look closer, listen, give thanks, and remember, the joy you seek is not far away. It may already be here, quiet and patient, waiting for you to notice." Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Academy of Sleep to continue this journey into the world of knowledge and mysteries. Your subscription helps us create more calming lectures and keep the channel growing with peaceful, thoughtful content. And if you'd like to leave a token of kindness by the fireside, you'll find a link to buy me a coffee in the description. Until next time.